Hello and welcome to Movements Moments at Target Gallery. My name is Eames Armstrong. I'm an artist and an independent curator based in Brooklyn, but with very strong ties to the DC area. When I was invited to jury this show, I was compelled initially by just how expansive a framework of movements, moments could be. I was struck by the complexity that was provided in the simple fact of the two words being plural. The words movements, moments, arrive embedded with so many types of action, and the terms themselves seem to shift as I think about them. I consider the turn from movement to movements, from quotidian gestures through bodily expressive practices to sweeping cultural and societal change. And in the space between moment and moments, there is at first a type of measurement all the way through a necessary pause, and then continued through the total accumulation of all time. So I had a lot to unpack even before I started to select the artworks for this exhibition. It's impossible for me to think about movements, moments outside of the extraordinary timeline that it has spanned. With the backdrop of a lethal global pandemic and months of social upheaval for racial justice, the exhibition open call closed just a few days before the presidential election. My first pass at the submissions took place just before November 3rd, and I finalized my decisions shortly after President Biden's win had been declared. Knowing that the open call encouraged video work, I went into the submissions imagining a darkened exhibition space. Looking back, it seems apt and, admittedly, maybe a little corny, to call those days just before the election a darkened space as well. As I chose the works for the show, I was particularly attentive to light and shadow, and I was drawn to uncertainty and repetition. Within the repetition, I recognized rituals and resilience. The resilience was there sometimes in spite of absurdity. And the repetition I saw wasn't just the same, but it was purposeful, often ritual, and it was full of renewal and a sort of fortification. The sense of uncertainty, even unease, among the works related to relationships between the body, the self, and greater forces, both elemental and societal. The tension of these relationships brought great rushing shifts of scale, such as from the very small to the infinite, from a moment to a movement. The exhibition takes place both in the Target Gallery and online, viewable as an exhibition catalog on the Target Gallery's website. I'd like to thank all of the artists for their excellent work and for participating in the show. My thanks also to the Target Gallery and the Torpedo Factory Art Center, and special thanks to the curator of exhibitions, Leslie Monami, for her support, encouragement, and her dedication to the artists and the artwork. And thank you for watching. I'm going to now say a few words about each of the works in the exhibition, starting with a performance by Jassie Rios that will be streamed right after I'm finished talking here. So please hang out, and please check out the exhibition in whatever format is safest for you. Between Stillness and Motion is a performance by Jassie Rios, played on Gram FX, an instrument designed by the artist. Gram FX is a hybrid. It is part DJ interface and part theremin, part acoustic and part electronic. It makes use of a hand-cranked Columbia gramophone, 78 RPM records, and computer processing using DRFX and pure data. The theremin is often regarded even if it might not be exactly, to be the first electronic instrument. It was invented in Russia in the 1920s. The theremin was, and still is, remarkable in that it is an instrument that does not require physical touch to play it. Instead, the instrument uses proximity sensors to modulate pitch and volume. Sound is sculpted by the movement of the performer's hand in the space between a horizontal and a vertical antenna. Similar to the theremin, in gram effects, the gestures of the artist's hands moving through the space above the instrument crafts the sound by controlling and altering the processing of the sound. Additional synthesis of the acoustic sounds created by the gramophone is the result of real-time audio data analysis through computer processing. Between Stillness and Motion, a work for gram effects, is a tour through over 100 years of audio recording and playback technologies, collapsed into a very immediate live performance made specifically for the exhibition Movements Moments. Jillian Abir MacMaster's work, Beatifica 2, is a self-portrait made using a scanner to manipulate the image. The resulting work is a vibrant blur, as if the figure has been smeared across and off of the page. Beatifica 2 is part of a series that addresses what the artist calls predatory behavior of Catholicism. In the Catholic Catechism, beatific vision has to do with the bliss of unmediated access to God afforded to the saints. That is, they literally see God. This teaching is fundamentally about perception. The more clear, the more direct the perception, the closer the union with God. MacMaster intervenes in this teaching that privileges clarity through a process of distortion. Image noise, in this work of scanography, functions as a barrier, mitigating access, and shifting the figure away from something fixed to something moving. For Lauren Woods, quote, movement becomes a method to process uncertainty and fear. In circle dances, Woods dances alone, and not exactly alone, in her fenced-in backyard. The video is layered with doubles and triples of herself or other figures moving through the space with her. The choreography isn't arduous, but exploratory, even playful, while the translucency of the layers add a more difficult, haunted dimension. The segments of the video read as a type of diary, a series of meditative strategies to cope with being isolated at home during this pandemic. Sweta Shah's It's Me is a painting of the moment of encountering the self. It's a pause of recognition, a pause of surprise. A little baby self is delivered profoundly and unexpectedly on a fiery red carrier. Everything grinds to a stop. The gesture is repeated in both figures. It's a mirror and it's a ricochet. The rich black background and minimal but purposeful use of color evoke theatrical lighting, underscoring both the drama and the quiet of this psychological fantasy scene. Eruption is a sculpture by Janet Wittenberg made of lushly layered glass. The swirling outer form opens up to reveal a protruding, rounded inner column. The artist cites as inspiration natural and human changes to the earth, as well as individual transformations. Quote, due to extreme events in our own lives and the world. The opening in Wittenberg's sculpture can be seen as a wound, an accident, or a purposeful vulnerability, a gift, an openness. It could be that the smaller form has burst its way into the open, or that the larger form is just doing its very best to protect it. Sara Dittrich's Breath of the Moon is an Atlantic tide clock paired with a quotation that begins, "But the most admirable thing of all is the union of the ocean with the orbit of the moon." The author of the text is Catholic Saint Bede, also known as Bede the Venerable, a significant historian and doctor of the Church who lived in the 7th and 8th centuries. The tide clock, essentially a ready-made a la Duchamp, tracks the orbit of the moon and, subsequently, the rise and fall of the ocean tides. This work pulls our awareness way out into space and way out into time. We think expansively outward to the real force that the moon exhibits on all of us, and back to the Middle Ages where a guy, a monk, marveled at that same force as well. In Fertility Pendulum, a full-bodied, full-breasted form swings endlessly on a ladder-like hoop. Artist Laurie Berenhaus explains that the movement is maintained by an electromagnet controlled by Arduino hardware. The form evokes ancient goddess imagery, the sort of objects used worldwide in fertility ritual and found now behind glass in museum vitrines. The repeating motion brings to mind magic and mystery of natural cycles, the moon, the tides, the body, life. I'm reminded of the continuity of wonder between the ancient world and the present. This timeless form of a fertility symbol is rocked perpetually by a relatively new technology of electromagnetism and a really quite current open source technology of Arduino. Alexander D'Agostino describes Mayfair Witch as a video spell that uses dance and witchcraft to remedy a rat infestation in a house during a pandemic. In this work, the point technique of classical ballet is employed towards pest control in a queer home ritual. Time and space are manipulated and layered in post-production, and the reference to rats in the pandemic evokes an earlier plague of the Black Death. In jockstrap and at times in a glittering Sirs hat, D'Agostino draws on the spirit of queer go-go dancers in this intimate back porch evocation. The artist is witch, ballet dancer, and exterminator. Josephine Lee's video performance, Kirogi, The Wild Geese, High in the Clean Blue Air Are Heading Home, shows the artist plunging into a pool over and over towards a heavy, sunken bird sculpture. Lee's use of geese is in reference to the term being used to describe Korean transnational families. The audio is simply the diegetic sound of the body splashing into the water. The artist's searching hands flail around until buoyancy brings her back to the surface. Lee describes this action as the body through a portal experiences dislocation, cultural yearning, and precarity. Indigestion, a video by Bingyi Liu, is a collage of urban space, historical investigation, archival research, field research, and live performance. This work explores, as Liu states, the relationship between taste, memory, and taste, identity. The present-day Canton neighborhood of Baltimore, Maryland, was once the site of a plantation. The plantation was named Canton after a Chinese port where the plantation owner did trade. In Indigestion, Liu explores that Baltimore neighborhood, meditating on the question, what does urbanization and globalization taste like? We've always been here, like hydrogen, like oxygen. It's a double-channel video by LaRissa Rogers, who says about her work, I quote, I foreground my mixed-race heritage by addressing and redefining ideas of cultural hybridity, authenticity, and visibility as a Black woman. In this work, Rogers performs a routine evocative of a self-care ritual, a usually private act, inverted here and performed outdoors, emphasizing the vulnerability of the individual. The materials of the action are oranges, some of which are actual fresh fruit, and some of which are frozen balls of orange juice, a kind of imposter of the real thing made of a product of the real thing, calling into question notions of authenticity and consumption. The gesture is both a washing away and a fortification. It's resilient. Sarah Trad's video, Clench My Fists, traces the movement of grief as it is passed from generation to generation. A densely layered collage of found footage from film and television, the form of the work mimics behavior caused by trauma, such as obsessive repetition and hyper-narrow focus. In Trad's words, the video looks at how men and women express grief and anger under the patriarchy, as well as how trauma and childhood experiences can evolve into mental illness and patterns of behavior as adults. The keening audio comes from archival recordings of Lebanese funeral singing and points directly to the personal experience of the artist as grief has moved through her own family following the passing of her Lebanese grandfather. Naming, Not Knowing, is a silent video by Allison Roberts of an ethereal form moving in a constrained field of sight. A form, a human form, as evidenced by occasional swipes of fingers, is recognizable beneath a translucent veil. The veil oscillates between being a covering or a screen, a door or a window out into another world. The underlying movement is in turn erratic and fluid, motivated, as Roberts describes it, as, quote, trying to shape the elusive through repeated attempts of control. A worn industrial steel enclosure glimmers with a smattering of hundreds of light points. This is Chris Combs' side guide control. The points of light are holes that were drilled into the metal box according to an algorithm, erratic but centrally clustered, with the intent of mimicking the human eye. Inside the box, a video screen shows scenes, shot by the artist, of environmental change, as described by Combs, quote, glacial meltwaters, geothermal venting, eroding human structures. These landscapes are glimpsed to the enclosure as a rhythm of color and light. Gala Cude-Pacheco's Thumb Knots in Ornamental Grass is a time-based triptych of prints that shows a simple intervention into a living household object. The artist twisted each blade of the plant into a simple overhand knot, 2 images in progress and 1 completed. The presentation of the work is sequential like film stills or a comic, but just not in being arranged vertically and not presenting time as in a comic as read left to right, in Western culture anyway. The artist says, the placement of knots into grass takes kinetic and visual cues from self-soothing rituals and externalized anxiety. There's something at once extremely familiar, yet so out of place about this gesture. I recognize it, but I've just not seen anything like it. It's as if through this very gentle action, the full force of nature could be at least temporarily halted. Matthew Borgen's Horizons is 5 horizontal panels like sequential art, rendered in a style like a comic. The trouble, or the delight of it, is that there is no sequence. This work kind of makes my head spin. Part of a larger choruses series, Horizons shows a bobbing head just above the water surface, looking out towards nothing we can see. And again, and again. Is this a sequential mistake? Or is this a sequentially accurate depiction of a totally excruciating passage of time? This halted, or not halted, way of handling time feels extra relevant to life in the pandemic, when days and months have passed at the same time, so fast and so slow as to produce a dizzying effect. Horizons is similarly dizzying. Find Your Purpose by Laura Mongiovi ripples with motion while held stationary. A silk tube dyed golden yellow with marigolds is attached at one opening to a small fan. The color is a reference to a prolific 19th century African-American jockey, Isaac Burns Murphy, while the silk itself is the material worn by jockeys for its light weight. The fan, a perpetual source, produces a kind of endless running of the sculptural object, a persistence, not just despite there being no obvious endpoint, but more like a racing to the finish in spite of that finish being absolutely unknown. Fittingly, it takes a little time to interpret what you're looking at in Lynn Silverman's Relative Time series. In Relative Time, State Center, Iowa, the photograph is divided fairly neatly between sky and earth. There's a neat foreground and background, and the just tilted tombstone on the left seems to be the punctum of the work, to use Roland Barthes' term. Until your eye lands on the streak, the smudge or smear, or what is that, framed perfectly in the middle of the image. In fact, it's a car on the road moving at just the right speed in proportion to the slow caption of the camera shutter, so that this car becomes an apparition. Someone passing becomes just a smudge. As a viewer, I suddenly become hyper aware of the duration of this not still image. The porcelain sculpture Unicode plus 25AF by Amy Sinbondit is named after a character symbol that resembles a black outline of a vertical rectangle. Unicode is meant to be a universal technology standard, so the way a character is encoded is always consistent with the way the character is expressed on, say, my computer screen. This sculpture came into being through a quite different process. Sinbondit assembled the raw porcelain into thin strips in a tall, upright position, knowing that in the kiln the work would lose its original shape. Quoting the artist, "The resulting form captured the evidence of graceful movement of the material under the conditions of heat and gravity." In my opening statement, I talked about the incredible timeline of this exhibition. Its formation spanned the fall of 2020, and the exhibition will be on view in the gallery through March 7th. Who knows what could happen between now and March 7th? although do note that the exhibition catalog will remain viewable online beyond that date, archived on the Target Gallery website. So, not long after the artists of the show were notified of their acceptance, 2020 did its thing, and my family and I contracted COVID. All in all, we were very lucky. We made it through, but I don't exaggerate to say that it was a few weeks of terror. Thinking about the experience now, it felt as though we were visited by a powerful and unseen force that tore through my family, our little selves, our fragile bodies. It's almost too simple to call it a virus, because it was also the forces of fear and of helplessness. As each of us fell sick, it was characterized, unfortunately, by my two favorite words for this exhibition: uncertainty and repetition. Now, I've returned to the artworks in Movements Moments, following illness, the darkness of the violent insurrection at the Capitol, an inauguration in a militarized zone, and on this specific day of recording, the first day of another impeachment trial. Once again, a lot has happened since the day that Leslie extended the invitation to me to jury this exhibition. A lot. But now, I'm looking at images of the artwork again. I'm watching and I'm listening to the videos, and now, in certain ways, the resilience in the works eclipses the uncertainty. The rituals and repetition are bolstered by confidence and a rich precision of intent. The stories behind these artworks span time greatly, from the primordial to the now and to the soon. Movements Moments spans pathos, rage, and bliss. And these artworks confront and contend with titanic unseen forces. But in the shifting space of light and shadow, these powerful, unwieldy forces are harnessed. They're tethered to the moment, and they're tethered in the artwork. Once again, thank you so much to the exhibiting artists, to Target Gallery and the Torpedo Factory Art Center, and many thanks to Leslie Monami, curator of exhibitions. And thanks to you for being here with us. Please stay safe, and please take care. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Jassie Rios.